He was just an ordinary man mining Bitcoin in his basement, until he discovered a repeating pattern in the blockchain data. His 20 years of NASA experience told him one thing. This wasn't just random data. This was a message, and the sender was 40 light-years away. But before we dive into this incredible story, if you're new here, welcome to The Last Witness. We share the most amazing, untold stories of ordinary people with extraordinary secrets. Stories where someone becomes the final witness to incredible events. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. And if you enjoy this story, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps us continue bringing you these incredible tales. Now let's get back to David's story. David Chen had always been fascinated by patterns. As a child in San Francisco's Chinatown, he would spend hours staring at the intricate designs in his grandmother's jade bracelet, counting the repetitions, mapping the mathematical relationships between each carved symbol. That fascination had served him well during his 20-year career at NASA's Ames Research Center in Mountain View. From 1985 to 2005, David had been one of the agency's top computer systems engineers, specializing in deep space communication protocols and data analysis for missions to Mars, Jupiter, and beyond. He'd been part of the team that designed the communication systems for the Mars Pathfinder mission. He'd helped develop the error correction algorithms that allowed the Voyager probes to keep transmitting data from the edge of the solar system. He'd spent countless nights in mission control, watching streams of binary data flow in from spacecraft millions of miles away, searching for patterns that meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. But in 2005, everything changed. Budget cuts hit NASA hard, and David, at 52, was offered an early retirement package. The space agency was shifting focus to newer, younger engineers with different skill sets. The era of deep space exploration was winding down, replaced by more practical Earth observation missions and international cooperation on the space station. David took the package and retreated to his modest two-story house in Fremont, California. For the first few years, he tried to stay busy with consulting work, helping private companies develop satellite communication systems. But by 2010, even that work had dried up. That's when he discovered Bitcoin. The concept immediately fascinated him. Here was a currency based entirely on mathematical principles, secured by cryptographic algorithms, and maintained by a distributed network of computers solving complex mathematical problems. It was like a digital echo of the work he'd done at NASA, except instead of communicating with spacecraft, the network was communicating with itself, creating a permanent, unalterable record of every transaction. David started small, running mining software on his personal computer. But as his understanding of the technology grew, so did his operation. By 2015, his basement had been transformed into a humming data center. Rows of specialized mining computers, ASICs, or application-specific integrated circuits, filled every available space, their fans creating a constant white noise that could be heard throughout the house. His neighbors thought he was obsessed. The electric bills were astronomical. His ex-wife, during their increasingly bitter divorce proceedings, had called it David's midlife crisis computer hobby. But David saw something they didn't. The blockchain wasn't just a ledger of financial transactions. It was the largest distributed computing network in human history, processing more calculations per second than all of NASA's supercomputers combined. And like any massive data stream, David knew it might contain patterns that others were missing. It was a Tuesday night in March 2018 when David first noticed something unusual. He'd been running his mining operation for 3 years at that point, and had developed custom software to analyze the blockchain data in ways that most miners never bothered with. While other miners only cared about successfully mining new blocks and earning Bitcoin rewards, David was fascinated by the underlying mathematical structures. His software flagged an anomaly in block 513,472. Hidden within the transaction data was a sequence of numbers that didn't fit the normal patterns of Bitcoin addresses or transaction amounts. At first glance, it looked like random noise, the kind of artifact that might be created by a software bug or corrupt data transmission. But David's NASA training had taught him that in space communications, There was no such thing as truly random data. Every bit, every byte, every signal had a source and a purpose. Random noise was often just signal that you hadn't learned how to decode yet. He spent the next 3 days analyzing the sequence, running it through every mathematical filter he'd learned during his NASA career. Prime number analysis, Fourier transforms, pattern recognition algorithms originally designed to detect signals from deep space probes. On Friday night, exhausted and frustrated, David was about to give up when his software finally found the key. The sequence wasn't random at all. It was a mathematical progression based on the Fibonacci sequence, but with modifications that incorporated pi, e, and several other fundamental mathematical constants. More importantly, the sequence was too elegant, too purposeful to be accidental. Someone had deliberately embedded this mathematical message in the Bitcoin blockchain. David's heart started racing. In his years at NASA, he'd been peripherally involved with SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. He knew that one of the key challenges in detecting alien communications was figuring out where to look and what to look for. Most SETI projects focused on radio telescopes, scanning the skies for organized signals from space. But what if an advanced civilization had found a more clever way to communicate? What if they were using Earth's own communication networks to send messages? The Bitcoin blockchain was perfect for this purpose. It was permanent. Once data was recorded in a block, it could never be deleted or modified. It was global. The same blockchain existed on computers all over the world. And it was constantly growing. New blocks were added every 10 minutes, providing a continuous channel for communication. If an alien intelligence wanted to send a message to Earth that would persist for centuries and be virtually impossible to suppress or censor, embedding it in the Bitcoin blockchain would be brilliant. David spent the weekend creating new analysis tools, scouring earlier blocks for similar patterns. He found nothing for weeks. Then, in early April, his software detected another anomaly in block 519,783. This sequence was different but related, built on the same mathematical foundation but extended with what appeared to be coordinates. Not Earth coordinates, but something else. Three-dimensional coordinates that, when David plotted them, seemed to point to a location in space approximately 40 light-years away, in the direction of the constellation Lyra. David's hands were shaking as he cross-referenced the coordinates with NASA's stellar databases. The location was precise, not just pointing toward a general area of the galaxy, but to a specific point in space where no known star or planet existed. At least, no known celestial body that was visible to Earth-based telescopes. But David remembered something from his NASA days. In 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope in Ohio had detected the famous WOW signal, a 72-second burst of radio noise that appeared to come from the constellation Sagittarius. The signal had been incredibly strong and perfectly matched the characteristics that SETI researchers expected from an extraterrestrial transmission. The signal had never repeated, and despite decades of searching, no similar transmission had ever been detected. Most scientists eventually dismissed it as either a terrestrial interference or a one-time cosmic event. But what if the WOW signal had been a test transmission? What if whoever sent it had been experimenting with different ways to communicate with Earth and had eventually settled on a more sophisticated method? David spent the next month diving deeper into the blockchain, analyzing every block that had been mined since Bitcoin's creation in 2009. He found 17 more sequences scattered throughout the blockchain's history, each one building on the mathematical foundation established by the first. Together, the sequences formed what could only be described as a primer, a mathematical introduction to more complex concepts. It was similar to the approach that human scientists had proposed for communicating with alien intelligence. Start with simple mathematical truths that any technological civilization would recognize, then gradually introduce more complex ideas. The sequences started with prime numbers and basic arithmetic, then progressed through geometry, calculus, and eventually into areas of mathematics that David didn't fully understand. The later sequences incorporated concepts from quantum mechanics and theoretical physics that were at the cutting edge of human knowledge. But the most startling discovery came in May 2018, when David realized that the sequences weren't just mathematical lessons, they were blueprints. Hidden within the advanced mathematical concepts were engineering specifications for what appeared to be some kind of communication device. The blueprints were incomplete. David estimated that he had maybe 30% of the total design, but even the partial information was extraordinary. The device seemed to work on principles of quantum entanglement that human science was only beginning to understand. It would theoretically allow for instantaneous communication across any distance, completely bypassing the speed of light limitations that made interstellar communication so challenging. David realized that he was looking at the most significant discovery in human history, proof of extraterrestrial intelligence, along with advanced technology that could revolutionize human civilization. The implications were staggering, but he also realized that he was completely alone with this knowledge. Who could he tell? Who would believe him? His first instinct was to contact his former colleagues at NASA. But David had been out of the agency for 13 years. His security clearances had long since expired, and many of his former colleagues had either retired or moved on to other careers. Even if he could get someone to listen to him, how could he prove that his analysis was correct? The Bitcoin blockchain was public, but David's interpretation of the hidden patterns required specialized knowledge that few people possessed. Most cryptography experts would likely dismiss his findings as pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data. David decided to be cautious. He began reaching out to former colleagues, starting with casual conversations about his interesting mathematical discoveries in blockchain analysis. He presented his findings as curiosities rather than groundbreaking revelations, testing their reactions. The responses were discouraging. Most of his former NASA colleagues were polite but dismissive. They suggested that David was seeing patterns that weren't really there, falling into the trap that had snared many amateur cryptographers and conspiracy theorists over the years. Dr. Patricia Wells, who had been David's supervisor during his final years at NASA, was more direct. "David, you need to be careful," she warned during a phone conversation in June 2018. "I've seen this happen to a lot of brilliant engineers after they retire. You start seeing conspiracies and hidden messages everywhere. It's a form of intellectual paranoia." "But Patricia, just look at the mathematical relationships. The probability of these patterns occurring randomly is essentially zero. The probability of winning the lottery is also essentially zero, but people win it every week. Large data sets always contain apparent patterns. That's why we have statistical significance tests." David tried to explain his statistical analysis, but Patricia wasn't interested in hearing the details. To her, David was just another retired engineer who had too much time on his hands and was seeing aliens in the data. Frustrated but undeterred, David decided to continue his research alone. If the messages in the blockchain were real, more sequences would eventually appear. And if he could gather enough data, eventually even the skeptics would have to take his findings seriously. Throughout the summer of 2018, David monitored every new block as it was added to the blockchain. His custom software became increasingly sophisticated, capable of detecting mathematical patterns that would be invisible to human analysis. In August, he found sequence number 18, embedded in block 537,291. This sequence was different from the others. Instead of mathematical concepts or engineering specifications, it appeared to be a temporal marker, a countdown. David's analysis suggested that the countdown was pointing to a specific date and time, December 21, 2018, at 11:47 p.m. Pacific Time, exactly 4 months away. The precision was unsettling. Not only were the alien communicators using Earth's own blockchain network, but they seemed to be operating on Earth's time zones and calendar system. This suggested a level of knowledge about human civilization that was both impressive and deeply concerning. David spent the autumn of 2018 in a state of growing anxiety. He continued to monitor the blockchain, finding 3 more sequences that seemed to confirm the December 21st date. But he still had no idea what was supposed to happen on that date. Was it going to be some kind of contact event? Would alien spacecraft appear in Earth's skies? Would the partial blueprints he'd discovered suddenly be completed, revealing the full design for the quantum communication device? Or was the whole thing an elaborate hoax, perpetrated by someone with advanced mathematical knowledge and too much time on their hands. As December approached, David realized that he couldn't face the date alone. If something significant was going to happen, he needed witnesses. And if nothing happened, he needed to be prepared for the possibility that he had indeed fallen into the trap that Patricia Wells had warned him about. David reached out to 3 people: his nephew Marcus, a computer science graduate student at UC Berkeley; Dr. Sarah Kim, a mathematician from Stanford who specialized in cryptographic analysis; and James Rodriguez, a former colleague from NASA who now worked for a private aerospace company. He invited them all to his house for December 21st, presenting it as a blockchain analysis demonstration, rather than a potential first contact event. Only Marcus agreed to come. "Uncle David," Marcus said when he arrived that evening, "I have to be honest. Mom thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. She asked me to check on you." David's sister had been worried about him for months. She'd noticed his increasing isolation, his obsession with his basement computer setup, and his growing tendency to discuss complex mathematical concepts that no one else in the family understood. "I know how it sounds," David admitted, "but I need you to see this. If I'm wrong, if nothing happens tonight, then maybe you're all right, and I should get professional help. But if I'm correct, then what? Little green men are going to knock on your door? I don't know what's going to happen. That's why I need you here." They spent the evening in David's basement, surrounded by the humming mining equipment. David walked Marcus through his analysis, showing him the mathematical sequences, the engineering blueprints, and the countdown that had led him to this date. Marcus was skeptical, but intrigued. As a computer science student, he could follow David's mathematical reasoning, even if he didn't buy the extraterrestrial conclusions. "I'll admit the patterns are interesting," Marcus said as they approached 11:47 p.m. "But couldn't they have been placed there by human beings? Maybe it's some kind of elaborate puzzle created by Bitcoin's mysterious inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto." "I considered that," David replied. "But the mathematical complexity is beyond what any single human could create, and the engineering specifications incorporate physics concepts that weren't widely known when Bitcoin was created." At 11:46 p.m., David's monitoring software suddenly came alive. New data was flooding into the blockchain at an unprecedented rate. Block 553,847 was massive, far larger than any normal Bitcoin block should be. "What's happening?" Marcus asked, staring at the scrolling data on David's screens. "I don't know. This has never happened before." The blockchain was accepting transactions at a rate that should have been impossible given the network's design limitations. Whoever was adding this data had found a way to bypass the normal constraints that limited block size and transaction processing speed. David's analysis software was struggling to keep up with the incoming data stream. Pattern after pattern flashed across his screens: mathematical sequences, engineering diagrams, and something that looked almost like a 3-dimensional map. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., everything stopped. The blockchain returned to normal operation, as if nothing had happened. But David's computers had recorded everything. Terabytes of data had been embedded in the blockchain in less than 60 seconds. "Did anyone else see this?" Marcus asked, checking Bitcoin news sites on his laptop. "Is anyone talking about what just happened?" The answer was no. Despite the massive data dump, the Bitcoin network continued operating normally. The additional data had been seamlessly integrated into the blockchain in a way that didn't disrupt regular transactions or trigger any alarms from the network monitoring systems. It was as if whoever had sent the data possessed a complete understanding of Bitcoin's technical architecture, better even than the anonymous creator who had designed the system. David spent the next week analyzing the new data. What he found exceeded his wildest expectations. The partial engineering blueprints he'd discovered earlier had been completed. The 3-dimensional maps showed detailed layouts of what appeared to be spacecraft or space stations. And embedded throughout the technical specifications was something that looked like a user manual. Not just instructions for building the quantum communication device, but detailed explanations of how to use it, along with safety protocols and what appeared to be a list of communication frequencies and contact procedures. The implications were staggering. The data suggested that there was an entire network of alien civilizations using quantum communication technology to stay in contact across interstellar distances. Earth had apparently been invited to join this network. But the most shocking revelation came when David analyzed the source metadata embedded in the December 21st transmission. The data had originated from a specific Bitcoin address, an address that had been active since the very early days of the Bitcoin network. When David traced the address's transaction history, he discovered that it controlled over 1 million Bitcoins, worth more than $3.5 billion at current market prices. The address had been accumulating Bitcoin through mining operations since 2009, suggesting that whoever owned it had been quietly participating in the Bitcoin network for nearly a decade. But the mining activity showed computational capabilities that far exceeded anything available to human technology. The address's owner had apparently been solving Bitcoin's cryptographic puzzles using quantum computing or some even more advanced technology. David realized that he was looking at evidence that extraterrestrial intelligence had been quietly monitoring and participating in human digital networks for years. They hadn't just sent a message. They had become stakeholders in human civilization's emerging digital economy. The question was, what did they want in return? The answer came in January 2019, when David received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Elizabeth Torres from the Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency showed up at David's front door on a rainy Tuesday morning, accompanied by two men in dark suits who introduced themselves only as federal agents. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Torres said as they settled into David's living room, "we understand you've been conducting some interesting research into blockchain anomalies." David's heart sank. Somehow, the government had learned about his discoveries. He'd been so careful to keep his research private, sharing it only with Marcus and documenting everything on encrypted hard drives that never connected to the internet. "I'm not sure what you mean," David said cautiously. Dr. Torres smiled. "Mr. Chen, we've been monitoring unusual blockchain activity for several months now. When our analysis led us to the same mathematical patterns you've been studying, we naturally became curious about who else might have noticed them." She opened a laptop and showed David screenshots of his own analysis. Not just the mathematical sequences, but his complete interpretation of the engineering blueprints and communication protocols. "How did you get this?" David asked. "We've been watching your nephew's internet activity," one of the agents replied. "He uploaded some of your findings to a secure cloud server last month. Our automated monitoring systems flagged them immediately." Marcus. David had asked him not to share the information, but apparently his nephew had been more intrigued by the discovery than he'd let on. "Are you here to arrest me?" David asked. "On the contrary," Dr. Torres said. "We're here to offer you a job." Dr. Torres explained that the Department of Defense had been tracking the blockchain anomalies since late 2017, shortly after David first discovered them. A classified program called Project Quantum Bridge had been established to study the mathematical sequences and determine whether they represented a genuine communication attempt from non-human intelligence. "We've independently verified your analysis, Dr. Torres said. "Our cryptographers and mathematicians agree that the probability of these patterns occurring naturally is essentially zero. We're dealing with a genuine attempt at first contact." "Then why hasn't this been announced to the public?" "Because we're not sure what we're dealing with yet. The December transmission provided us with technical specifications that are centuries ahead of human science. If this technology fell into the wrong hands, hostile foreign governments, terrorist organizations, even well-meaning but unprepared civilian researchers, the consequences could be catastrophic." Dr. Torres showed David classified analyses of the quantum communication blueprints. Government scientists had been trying to understand the technology for months, but were struggling with concepts that pushed the boundaries of human physics knowledge. "We need someone with your background," she continued. "Someone who understands both the mathematical patterns and the underlying blockchain technology. Someone who's been studying this phenomenon longer than anyone else." David looked around his cluttered living room, thinking about the past year of isolation and frustration. His family thought he was losing his mind. His former colleagues dismissed him as a conspiracy theorist. But here were government scientists telling him that his discoveries were not only real, but represented the most significant development in human history. What would my role be? Lead analyst for Project Quantum Bridge. You'd work with our top scientists and engineers to decode the remaining technical specifications, and eventually, to build and test the communication device described in the blueprints. And the ultimate goal? Dr. Torres exchanged glances with the agents. To establish formal communication with whoever sent these messages, to determine their intentions, and to decide whether humanity is ready to join what appears to be a galactic communication network. David spent the next week considering the offer. It meant leaving behind his private research, his basement mining operation, and his quiet life in Fremont. It meant returning to government work, with all the bureaucracy and security restrictions that entailed. But it also meant having the resources and support to pursue the most important scientific investigation of his lifetime. He accepted the position in February 2019. Project Quantum Bridge operated out of a classified facility in Nevada, not far from the infamous Area 51. David's team included some of the most brilliant scientists and engineers in the country. Quantum physicists from MIT, cryptographers from the NSA, and aerospace engineers who had worked on the most advanced military projects. The first phase of the project focused on completing the analysis of the technical blueprints embedded in the blockchain. Working together, the team was able to decode specifications that had puzzled David for months. The quantum communication device was more complex than any technology in human possession, but the principles were theoretically sound. It worked by creating paired quantum particles that remained connected across any distance, a phenomenon Einstein had called spooky action at a distance. By manipulating the quantum states of these particles, the device could transmit information instantaneously across interstellar distances. The technology would revolutionize not just communication, but space exploration, making real-time contact with distant spacecraft possible for the first time. But building the device required materials and manufacturing techniques that pushed human technology to its limits. Some components required precision engineering at the atomic level. Others needed exotic materials that existed only in tiny quantities in specialized research laboratories. The project consumed enormous resources and required cooperation between government agencies that had never worked together before. The Department of Defense, NASA, the Department of Energy, and several civilian research institutions all contributed expertise and equipment. By late 2019, the team had constructed a prototype device the size of a shipping container, packed with quantum processing equipment that had cost over $100 million to develop. The device was theoretically capable of receiving transmissions using the protocols described in the blockchain blueprints, but the team wasn't sure if it would actually work. The first test was scheduled for December 21, 2019. Exactly 1 year after the major blockchain transmission. David stood in the control room of the Nevada facility, watching as technicians made final adjustments to the quantum communication array. After more than a year of intensive work, they were finally ready to attempt contact with whoever had been sending the blockchain messages. "All systems are green," reported Dr. Sarah Kim, who had eventually joined the project after David convinced her that the mathematical patterns were genuine. "Quantum entanglement generators are stable. Transmission protocols loaded. Reception array is active," added Dr. James Rodriguez, David's former NASA colleague who now served as the project's technical director. "We're scanning all the frequency ranges specified in the blueprints." Dr. Torres watched from the observation deck above the control room, along with representatives from various government agencies and military branches. The success or failure of this test would determine the future of Project Quantum Bridge and humanity's first attempt at interstellar communication. "Initiating contact sequence," David announced. The device hummed to life, its quantum processors working at speeds that strained the laws of physics. According to the blueprints, the initial contact protocol required sending a specific mathematical sequence, a modified version of the Fibonacci progression that had appeared in the first blockchain messages. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The quantum communication array transmitted its signal into the void, reaching out across 40 light-years of space toward the coordinates that had been embedded in the blockchain. Then the response came. Not as radio waves or light signals that would take decades to cross interstellar space, but as instantaneous changes in the quantum states of particles inside the receiving array. Information from another star system, arriving in real time. The initial response was simple. The same mathematical sequence they had transmitted, but with additional complexity added. It was a confirmation signal, proving that something intelligent had received their message and was responding according to the protocols outlined in the blockchain blueprints. "We have contact," David announced, his voice shaking with excitement and disbelief. Over the next several hours, the exchange grew more sophisticated. The alien intelligence, for lack of a better term, began transmitting increasingly complex mathematical concepts, building toward what appeared to be actual language. The breakthrough came when the entity began sending three-dimensional models, geometric shapes that represented concepts rather than words. A sphere meant unity, or wholeness. A branching tree structure indicated growth, or development. Interconnected networks represented communication, or cooperation. By analyzing the patterns in these conceptual transmissions, the team began to construct a basic understanding of how the aliens communicated. It wasn't language in the human sense, but rather a direct exchange of ideas through mathematical and geometric representations. The first meaningful exchange came after 6 hours of contact. The alien intelligence transmitted a complex three-dimensional model showing what appeared to be a galaxy, specifically, the Milky Way galaxy, as seen from outside. Scattered throughout the galactic model were thousands of bright points, each one pulsing with the same mathematical signature that had appeared in the Bitcoin blockchain. The message was clear. There was an extensive network of communicating civilizations throughout the galaxy, and Earth was being invited to join. But the invitation came with conditions. The alien intelligence transmitted detailed information about the network's structure and protocols. Membership required technological capabilities that Earth barely possessed, even with the quantum communication device. More importantly, it required social and political stability that human civilization had never achieved. The network civilizations had apparently learned from bitter experience that species with unresolved internal conflicts posed dangers to the larger galactic community. Worlds that joined the network before achieving internal peace often used the advanced technologies they gained access to in destructive wars that sometimes threatened other member civilizations. Earth would be allowed to maintain its quantum communication device and continue receiving transmissions from the network. But full membership, including access to advanced technologies like faster-than-light travel and unlimited clean energy, would have to wait until humanity demonstrated that it could govern itself responsibly. The message was both inspiring and sobering. Humanity wasn't alone in the universe, and incredible opportunities awaited in the future. But those opportunities would require fundamental changes in how human beings treated each other and their planet. Dr. Torres called an emergency briefing for the next morning, bringing together representatives from the highest levels of government and military leadership. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "last night we made contact with representatives of what appears to be a galactic federation of intelligent species. The implications are beyond anything we've ever had to consider." The briefing room was filled with some of the most powerful people in the United States government, but they listened in stunned silence as Dr. Torres outlined the previous night's communications. "The technology we've gained access to could solve most of humanity's problems," she continued. "Climate change, energy shortages, resource scarcity, all of these challenges become manageable with the technologies described in these transmissions. But the aliens won't share these technologies until they're convinced that humanity won't use them destructively." The questions that followed revealed the complexity of the situation humanity now faced. How could Earth demonstrate its readiness to join a galactic community when nations still fought wars over territory and resources? How could humanity prove its peaceful intentions when nuclear weapons remained poised for launch in silos around the world? And perhaps most challenging of all, how could world leaders convince their populations to make the sacrifices necessary to achieve the unity and stability that the galactic network required? The debate continued for months. Some government officials argued for keeping the discovery classified indefinitely, using the alien technology to gain strategic advantages over other nations. Others pushed for immediate public disclosure, believing that the knowledge of alien contact would inspire humanity to overcome its divisions. David found himself caught in the middle of these discussions, serving as both technical advisor and translator for ongoing communications with the Galactic Network. His basement mining operation in Fremont seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 2 years since his first discovery of the blockchain patterns. The aliens, who referred to themselves through a geometric concept that roughly translated as the cooperative, continued to provide technical information and guidance. They seemed genuinely interested in helping humanity join their network, but remained firm in their requirements. In late 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic swept across Earth, the cooperative transmitted a message that changed everything. The pandemic, they explained, was exactly the kind of test that determined a species' readiness for galactic membership. How humanity responded to this global crisis would demonstrate whether Earth's civilizations could cooperate effectively when faced with existential challenges. The message included detailed technical specifications for medical technologies that could end the pandemic within weeks. Advanced antiviral treatments, rapid vaccine development platforms, and manufacturing techniques that could produce unlimited quantities of medical supplies. But the cooperative made it clear that these technologies would only be released if Earth's nations demonstrated unprecedented cooperation in their distribution. No country could gain exclusive access to the medical advances. No population could be left behind. The technologies had to be shared freely and used for the benefit of all humanity. It was the ultimate test of human civilization's readiness to join a community based on cooperation rather than competition. David watched the global response with a mixture of hope and frustration. Some world leaders embraced the opportunity, seeing the pandemic as a chance to demonstrate humanity's potential for cooperation. Others remained suspicious, worried about giving up national advantages or revealing the existence of alien contact to their populations. The debate raged for months while people continued to die from a disease that could be eliminated with technology that sat locked in classified government servers. Finally, in early 2021, a coalition of scientists and world leaders made the decision that would define humanity's future. Led by figures like Dr. Torres and several heads of state who had been briefed on Project Quantum Bridge, they announced their intention to reveal the existence of alien contact to the world. The announcement was carefully planned, with simultaneous press conferences in major capitals around the globe. The message was simple. Humanity had made contact with a galactic community of intelligent species, and that community was offering to share technologies that could solve many of Earth's greatest challenges. But the offer came with requirements that would test every assumption about how human civilization operated. David Chen, the retired NASA engineer who had discovered patterns in Bitcoin blockchain data in his basement, found himself standing at the podium of the United Nations General Assembly, explaining to representatives of every nation on Earth how cryptocurrency mining had led to the most significant moment in human history. David concluded his presentation saying, "The choice before us is simple. We can continue operating as separate, competing nations and remain isolated in the universe. Or we can learn to work together as a single species and join a community of civilizations that spans the galaxy." The vote was closer than anyone had hoped, but humanity chose cooperation. The medical technologies were released immediately, ending the pandemic within 6 months. Over the following years, the cooperative gradually shared additional technologies, clean fusion energy, advanced agriculture techniques, and manufacturing methods that eliminated poverty and resource scarcity. But the most important changes weren't technological. The knowledge that humanity was part of a larger galactic community fundamentally altered how people thought about their planet and each other. National boundaries became less important. Religious and ethnic conflicts declined as people focused on their shared identity as Earthlings. It wasn't a perfect transformation. There were setbacks, conflicts, and groups that resisted the changes. But overall, humanity began to mature as a species, learning to see itself as the cooperative had always seen it: a single, interconnected civilization with unlimited potential. David Chen retired from government service in 2025, returning to his house in Fremont. But his basement was no longer filled with cryptocurrency mining equipment. Instead, it housed a smaller version of the quantum communication array, allowing him to maintain regular contact with the cooperative's representatives. He had become Earth's first ambassador to the galactic community, not through any official appointment, but simply because he was the human who had maintained contact the longest and understood the alien communication protocols better than anyone else. On quiet evenings, David would sit in his basement, exchanging mathematical concepts and geometric ideas with intelligences scattered across the galaxy. They shared knowledge about their histories, their sciences, and their philosophies. They debated questions about consciousness, creativity, and the meaning of existence that spanned multiple star systems. Sometimes David thought about the chain of events that had led from his grandmother's jade bracelet to humanity's membership in a galactic federation. Pattern recognition, mathematical analysis, and simple curiosity had opened doors that no one had imagined possible. The Bitcoin blockchain still contained all the original messages that had started everything. They remained embedded in the permanent record, available for anyone with the knowledge and tools to find them. David sometimes wondered if other civilizations would discover similar patterns in their own communication networks, leading to their own moments of first contact. But mostly, he focused on the present and the future. Humanity had passed its first test and been welcomed into the galactic community. Greater challenges and opportunities lay ahead, as Earth's population began to explore not just their own solar system, but the vast network of connected worlds that stretched across the Milky Way. The last witness to humanity's isolation had become the first ambassador to its integration with the cosmos, and it had all started with patterns in the data stream of a cryptocurrency that most people still didn't fully understand. David smiled as he prepared for another evening of interstellar conversation, thinking about how the universe always seemed to hide its greatest secrets in the most unexpected places. Thank you for listening to this incredible story here on The Last Witness. If you enjoyed David's discovery and want to hear more amazing tales of ordinary people who become the final witnesses to extraordinary events, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these untold stories that deserve to be heard. What did you think about the idea of alien intelligence using cryptocurrency networks to communicate with humanity? Do you believe we're ready as a species to join a galactic community? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts on these stories. And remember, sometimes the most incredible discoveries are hidden in the data streams we see every day. Until next time, keep listening and keep witnessing the truth.